I'm going to talk about wilderness, and I know that's a big theme of this place. I can't see everybody, but I think I can see most of your hands. If I ask you this question, how many of you have ever seen a wolf while you're traveling? Holy caramba. Okay. How many of you have heard a wolf howl while you're traveling? Okay, I'm done. It's a pretty amazing animal to encounter, as I'm sure you're very much aware of that. The question about wolves and wilderness is, does it really matter if they're there? Is wilderness still wilderness if they're there or they're not there? And this particular slide here is a really iconic place in the Yukon. It's called Two Ocean Creek, and on this side of the drainage goes out to the Porcupine River and the Mackenzie, or the Yukon drainage, and on this side is the Mackenzie. So this is a Rat River, Two Ocean Creek pack. And if they're not on this mountain, is it as important a place in your mind for wilderness, or is it really not make any difference at all? And I'm going to talk about, most of the stuff I'm going to talk about is about the Yukon and how it's formed our psyche about wolves and how they fit into wilderness, and a couple of really important writers that you're going to recognize that I'm going to go through. Then at the end of this, I'm going to talk about another place. It's in Germany, and it's the question is wilderness wolves? And I'm going to juxtapose that question and then try to show you the real difference that I see in those two questions. So we're going to get a definition of wilderness. It says, an area undisturbed by human activity with a naturally developed community. So that's wilderness. This is an image of the Firth Delta up on the North Yukon that I was studying wolves, and this happens to be in April. Very iconic wilderness as well. But it doesn't say wolves in this particular definition, and it probably doesn't need to. But how about if we look at some literature that got developed in the early 1900s that really built this sort of notion that wolves are wilderness. And that's the argument I'm going to make, that wolves actually are wilderness. And if you don't have them, you actually don't have complete wilderness. And I wrote about this in the book Wolves of the Yukon, which is available in the book sale section. And it's from a chapter called The Primordial Beast. And I'm going to follow a lot of what I wrote back 10 years ago and make that argument here. So Jack London and Robert Service, they're really the most popular fiction writer in the 20th century was Jack London, and I think Robert Service followed behind as one of the most important poets of the 20th century. And all of their writings really came from trips they did to the Yukon during the gold rush. And London's background is he wrote two really iconic books, Call of the Wild and White Fang. He spent about 8 months in the Yukon as part of his whole experience to develop any of those characters. He arrived in 1897. He got to a place called Stewart River, which is about maybe 80 miles south of Dawson City. And he spent the winter there. He went to Dawson once. He got scurvy over the winter, and then he left in 1898. So his experience was really limited, but he wrote some pretty important books, I think, from an entertainment perspective, and you're going to see the new movie Call of the Wild that's come maybe out now, I think, with an animated dog, Buck, which may or may not be very exciting to watch. I haven't seen it yet, but the important part of Call of the Wild is Buck, and he has it's a primitive magnetism that Buck is drawn to become a wolf, which is not even possible in the sense of how a dog evolves and what it can know and how it can behave. But at the same time, it's an interesting magnetism that he is experiencing, and what he wants to do is he wants to follow wolf pack ways and go back into the womb of time. These are words that London wrote. And the point of all this is London is telling us that to hunt and kill and the day-to-day survival is all that there is in wilderness. That's what pure wilderness is, and wolves represent that pure wilderness, and that we're drawn to that wilderness as humans. We're drawn there, and the human allegory is London was kind of pretty heroic in his image of himself, and probably pretty racist at the same time. And he really focused on this notion that we're loners and that we're hunters, and that we need to go back into this wilderness place to get our heroic connection to nature recovered and resupplied. And I'm going to read you a passage from Call of the Wild that describes Buck. And this is kind of at the end of the book. And it's really, he's taking longer and longer on his hunting sorties away from cabin life. He's living with a guy up in the Stewart River drainage. And he's drawn further into the forest by a primitive magnetism. So here's how London describes what he's really experiencing. The blood longing became stronger than ever before. He was a killer, a thing that preyed, living on the things that lived. Unaided, alone, by virtue of his own strength and prowess, surviving triumphantly in a hostile environment where only the strong survived. Because of all this, he became possessed of a great pride in himself, which communicated itself like a contagion in his physical being. So that's the primordial beast that he says the dog is actually descending into, and it's an important place to be. And the human allegory is interesting because when somebody wrote about that and said, oh, you're really talking about us. You're talking about us leaving civilization and going into this wilderness, and this is our experience. He said, I didn't mean to do any of that. I just wrote this book about a dog. And so I'm not sure if he was tongue-in-cheek or not, but it became this real huge sort of philosophical discussion they had at the turn of the century about the importance of wilderness. And I'm going to go next to the other book that was really important that he wrote. I mean, it's White Fang, and it's the opposite. And what happens in White Fang is White Fang actually is sort of semi-wild. He's running with a wolf pack of 40. He kills a couple of men who are dragging a coffin up by Great Slave Lake in the middle of the winter. But he gets tamed, and that's the sort of the argument is that in order to become civilized, you have to be tamed. So dogs in all of London's books are heroic and they're passionate, so they are humanized in many ways. Where the wolves, again, are pure ruthlessness, unforgiving. They fight to the death. They're untamed. And I'm going to read you a passage, very short passage out of White Fang, and it's describing how dogs are fearing the wolf character. So this is a passage from White Fang, and they're dogs thinking about wolves. He was the wild, the unknown, the terrible, the ever-menacing, the thing that prowled in the darkness around the fires of the primeval world, where the dogs, cowering close to the fires, were reshaping their instincts, leaving to fear the wild out of which they came, and which they had deserted and betrayed. So it's, another sort of transgression about the difference between wolves and dogs, being wolves the ruthless and the unforgiving. They kill or be killed, they eat or be eaten, and us, and dogs, which are a representation of us in some way, if you're willing to interpret that. So I'll move real quick to Robert Service, and I'll read his sort of perception about how wolves fit into the Yukon wilderness. And he really wasn't so much focused on the character of us, he was focused on the character of the land. And he, I think, wrote really beautiful sort of allegories about how wolves represent this wildness that the Yukon has. And if you think about wilderness 100 years ago, we didn't have Gore-Tex, we didn't have InReach, we had almost no real support. And people that moved to the Yukon for gold were completely unprepared for what they were going to experience. There's temperatures of minus 70 below Fahrenheit. It was the end of the Little Ice Age. It was really a really inhospitable place. And Service wrote, I think, some pretty interesting poems about that. And this is just a piece from that. First is the heart of the sourdough. And I'll read it out if you can't read it there. Then, when as wolf dogs fight, we fought the lean wolf land and I. Fought and bled till the snows are red under the reeling sky. Even as lean wolf dogs go down, will I go down and die. So this is a classic sort of I'm going to have to beat this land if I'm going to survive. And it's the allegory again of is wolves and dog fighting. The second one is the land that God forgot. And I really like this one because it really focuses on the sense of howling. And I think that howling, wolves howling, is really the nature of the animal in the wilderness. You rarely ever see a wolf. I lived in the Yukon for 40 some odd years, and I saw maybe 8 or 9 times. I actually saw wolves while I was on the ground. I saw lots of them when I was working with aircraft, but they're not easy to see, and they're really very rare. And having so many people see them, you're really experiencing something very unique. But howling is, I think, hugely evocative in terms of developing a feeling in us of being in a place that we're not the apex predator. So gaunt against the gibbous moon, piercing the silence velvet piled, a lone wolf howls his ancient ruin, the fell arch spirit of the wild. O outcast land, O leper land, let the lone wolf cry all express, the hate insensate of thy hand, thy heart's abysmal loneliness. So do we need them? Do we need wolves? If they're the wilderness of our mind, do we need them somehow to really expose that feeling in us when we go into places that are wild? The one thing that wolves do is they kill a lot of big things that hunters kill, and this has been one of the great sort of struggles that wolves have had over many it's almost a couple of hundred years now, where they were actually pretty much eradicated from the lower 48 and parts of Canada. And it's this conflict that I think a lot of people don't want them for that reason. They think that they're actually taking something away from their experience in wilderness, which is maybe moose or a caribou or a sheep or a deer or an elk that they want to hunt. And I won't get into too much of that, but it definitely is part of the psyche of how wolves interact with human beings, and a very important element of that. So do we fear them? We do. That's why I think they're an important part of wilderness. I don't mean fear them in that we're going to be killed by them, because it's so rare that people are killed by wolves. There's 2 examples that I know of in the last 100 years where people were actually chased down and killed by wolves, compared to many more by grizzly bears, by black bears, by cougars. So, but we still have some fear of them, and I think that's important. And it's not I don't think it's a fear that actually develops a huge respect when we go into a place that wolves live. So we go back to that question: are wolves wilderness? And I'm going to say, yeah, that's my argument. I think that they're a really important element of wilderness. And if we don't have it, there's something that's missing from our experience. So is this wilderness without wolves? Don't know. I mean, what do you think? You look at that and you say, well, that's some beautiful mountains. That's a Yukon near Canoe National Park. If wolves were there, would that be a different place in your mind? And this one, do wolves add wilderness to this place? So let's put wolves into this picture of the mountains and look at this image. How do we feel about wilderness with this? Is this something that exudes a different perspective on what that mountain actually is performing? And of course, what wolves are doing here is they're traveling over the mountains, they're hunting goats and sheep in the Yukon, and they're moving into a place that they're going to actually be hunting moose. This is the Arc Mountain Daredevils, we called them way back. We had them radio collared near Whitehorse. Or this place. You can't really even see the wolves. I show this slide to kids when I give talks at schools, and they get all excited about counting the number of wolves. Can you count the number of wolves in this? There's 7. But there's something important about this. The wolves just appear in this picture. They're rocks until they're wolves. And as soon as you see them, as soon as the kids see them, their picture of this place changes, and they become really animated about. They've discovered something. They've seen something in the land that was maybe not so obvious. So let's go and ask this question, is wilderness wolves? And we leave North America, we go to Europe, and we go to Europe where wolves were absent for many hundreds of years, and of all of the places where 80 million people live is Germany. And we're going to explore this idea, is wilderness wolves? So if wolves are on the land, does that mean it's wilderness? And you can see in this particular picture, that is going to be a no. It doesn't make any difference that there's wilderness. If you look to see what's in the background there, there's an coal generating electrical plant that basically dominates this landscape for a couple of 100 square kilometers, you'll see here. So this is wolf habitat in 2000 in northern Germany. One wolf pack living on the border with Poland in an incredibly industrialized landscape. And this is what it looks like. And this isn't just kind of a picture trying to show you how invented this landscape is. This is very typical of what this place looks like. There's at least a dozen of these coal generating plants, and what they do is that it's a brown coal area, which means it's low grade. It's at only about 100 feet below the surface. They take the overburden off, they push it all back behind it, and they pick up the coal, and then they run them through these big conveyors into and directly generate power through them. And it's huge. This landscape is huge, and everything in this landscape behind it is reinvented. Everything is reinvented. There's hills there. There's new ponds they decide they're going to put a river there. They just change the whole landscape. They plant trees. And what happens behind it is it becomes this hugely beneficial area for roe deer, red deer, and wild pigs, and of course, wolves. And what's happened is wolves have recovered into this area in an incredible way. And this work is done by a friend named Ilka Reinhardt. And it's really about recolonization of an industrial and an agricultural landscape. Wilderness has almost nothing to do with this. The place that wolves get a hold of and find a place to live in this and move and recolonize is actually on military bases. These are abandoned military bases or not used so much anymore from the East German GDR. And these are stepping stones for wolves from moving from the east to the west part of Germany. So here we are with wolves 20 years later. One pack is now 105 packs, and there's 25 more pairs there. There's probably going to be over 1,000 wolves in northern Germany. And what wolves really needed in this area is something not wilderness. They needed protection. And here's just another picture of a rendezvous site. This is where one of the wolf packs rendezvoused with their pups for a month under this wonderful electrical grid. So you can see that wolves don't need wilderness to survive. What they really need is they need protection from hunting. and which is what happened in Germany. They stopped the hunting of wolves, made it illegal, and it's still illegal. It can only be, there's only special wolves that can be killed. They had these protected places, which are military training areas, and there was always lots of prey in this area. And there's still lots of conflict because wolves are looking for natural prey, but they're bumping into sheep. They're killing hunting dogs. They're killing deer that hunters want. The European hunters are trophy-based hunters, very different than most hunters in Canada. But that culture is where wolves have dropped themselves into. But they don't need wilderness to be there. They just need to be protected and allowed to live. And they are going to occupy more than half of Germany, probably within the next 4 or 5 years. So, are wolves wilderness? I think so. And has our view of wilderness and wolves changed? I think it's changed enormously. I don't think most people here want to go into wilderness and descend into Buck's sort of world where he's a loner and he's killing everything and he's become one with nature, but he's become ruthless and he's become an animal that is disconnected from everything but his own survival. I think what we look for in wilderness is something else, and it's changed. Technology has changed us so much. We've got sat phones, we've got Gore-Tex jackets, and we've got inReaches, we've got Google Earth. When we plan a trip now, it's not the same as that wonderful film that we saw last night that Mike Stein showed, where a bunch of guys got in 3 canoes and they went down with a map from 1888 to see where things are about now. And it was an incredible story. I was absolutely stunned by that film. We showed up in the Yukon about that time, wore the same clothes when we were first canoeing, Carolyn and I. So why do we canoe places like the Albany and the Thelon and the Rat River and the Snake and the Bonnet Plume and the Horton River, all these incredible places? I think we go there because it's the antithesis of civilization. We have civilization everywhere we go, and we certainly see it in places like Toronto. And we need that challenge that Jack London talked about, this challenge to go and do something that is more primal. And that's can we be self-sufficient? Can we plan our trips? Can we go into these places and live through these experiences and benefit from them and enjoy each other's company? It's a huge amount of what we're doing is camaraderie, and all of it. And we've done, Carolyn and I have done many different river trips in different places in the Yukon. I think that's what comes out of it. It isn't so much that we're experiencing this beautiful wilderness, which of course we are, but that's put into the context of being with friends who are also sharing that, which is what makes us social human beings, and enjoy that very much. And in the end, this is my last slide, it's really, again, a real quick sort of reminder that there's an untamed element of wilderness, and wolves add to our soul to wilderness, and wilderness adds its soul to us. And I think it comes from experiencing wolves in different ways, and you can fear them, and I think that builds a little bit of expectation that, oh gee, I'm going to come around the corner and there's going to be a wolf standing on the shore or on a bar, and I'm going to immediately feel something about that. And the first thing is, oh, it's a wolf, and I'm going to have to be careful. So if we see them, or we see their tracks, we are confirmed that we're in a place that we think is a more complete wilderness. We hear them and then we know it. I think if we hear a wolf howl, and I think of the first time that Carolyn and I heard a wolf pack howling was on the Nesutlan River with our, how old was, 18 months old, and this pack surrounded us. It was the most incredible experience. Probably a pack of 500. Okay, maybe not. But enough to scare the crap out of us in the tent in the middle of the night. And anyway, it was an experience that I never forgot. But the end of it is that we know they're there. When we know they're there, that's all we need to know. So that's my talk. Thank you.